Chapter 12. Lincoln came home from practice to find Flacco gnawing on a newspaper. A rubber band was caught between his teeth. "What are you doing?" Lincoln laughed. He went down to his good knee and worked the rubber band back and forth like dental floss until it came out. He shot the slobber-covered rubber band into the bushes and went inside. It was 4:15, more than 3 hours before game time. To kill time, Lincoln did some of his homework while Flacco paced from room to room. "That's how I feel," Lincoln must, "even though I'm not playing nervous." He took a hot bath and was getting out when he heard a noise in the kitchen, a rustle of newspaper and a bump against a chair. Lincoln's heart began to pound. He pulled the framed picture off the wall and, towel wrapped around his waist, tiptoed down the hallway. "The thief's back," Lincoln thought. "I'll slam this guy's face and make him pay." But it was his mother putting groceries away. Lincoln said, "Hi, Mom," and she jumped, dropping a bundle of spinach, and held a hand over her heart. "Ay, Dios." She bent down to pick up the spinach. "You scared me." "You mean you scared me?" "What are you doing with that picture?" Lincoln turned it around. It was of him and Flacco standing on a rock acting goofy. It had been taken right after his father left, to keep their minds off the breakup. He and his mother, with a new dog, had gone on weekend trips out of the city. The picture had been taken on one of their excursions. "I thought you were the guy who broke into our house. I was going to hit you with it." His mother made a face. "Get dressed. Vas a pescar un cataro. You're going to catch a cold." They ate an early dinner of leftover chili verde. Lincoln downed 2 glasses of milk and ate 3 tortillas. He wasn't going to play, so why not eat like a king? He told his mother about how unfair Coach Acetis was. "Oh, honey, he's just a coach. That's how they are." She got up and poured herself a cup of coffee. "He wants his team to win, and if you're hurt, then he has to get another player." "Nah, Mom, it's more than that." Lincoln didn't know how to explain it. "He just doesn't like me. It's because I'm from, or was from, Franklin. You heard what Roy said about Acetis mouthing off about Mexicans?" His mother sipped her coffee. "He was young then. He's a grown man now." "There's something weird about him." "There's something weird about all of us," she countered and crossed her eyes. "Don't worry. I'll be there tonight." Lincoln laughed and crossed his own eyes. Lincoln gathered the dishes and set them in the sink. He was sorry he couldn't make his mother understand. He left her sipping her coffee and turning the pages of her appointment book. He went to his bedroom to gather his stuff. He folded his Columbus basketball uniform and sweats into his game bag along with his shoes, 3 pairs of socks, jock tape, Band-Aids, water bottle, knee pads, and a candy bar. But he took out the candy bar and ate it, thinking he wouldn't be needing it for energy later. After all, he thought, I'm not going to play. His mother drove him to the school. "Regreso más tarde. I'll be back later." "I need to pick up something at the drugstore," she said as she dropped Lincoln off. She started to drive off but braked and rolled down her power window. She stuck her head out. "Roy'll be coming. Look for him." Lincoln watched the red taillights of her Maxima grow small as they disappeared up the street. It was a little before 7 and game time was 7:30. The gym was warm and bright. The pep band was setting up, the tuba honking like a fat goose. The cheerleaders stood in a circle, clapping their white gloved hands, and a few parents were sitting on the Columbus side. The Franklin side was empty, except for the janitor, who sat along in the top row of the bleachers, eating a sandwich. Lincoln went into the locker room, where most of the players were already dressed. He could see that they were nervous and unsure. They were arguing and punching each other playfully. "Hey, Link," James called, pinned against the lockers by Grady, who was trying to fit a jock over James's head. Bukowski had Mitchell in a headlock. The players looked up at Lincoln. Bukowski straightened up and remarked, "Durkin said you said that we're going to lose. Why did you say that?" "I just said what I think." Lincoln unlaced his shoes and stepped out of his pants. He wished he hadn't said that, but Durkins had caught him in a sour mood. "Yeah? Well, I don't like how you think," Bukowski said. "You think you're special." "No, I don't." "You and your hurt knee." Lincoln stared at Bukowski. He had never liked him, and he liked him even less now. "If you want to throw some, any time, Big Mouth." They stared at each other, fists clenched and chest puffed out. Lincoln wasn't sure if he could take Bukowski, who he heard bit when he fought, but he wasn't going to back down either. Lincoln backed down only when there was a gang of 3 or 4. One guy didn't mean much. At worst, he could get beat up, a jab to the jaw, a headbutt under the chin, a swift kick in the groin. With a gang, there was no chance. They stared at each other, chest to chest. Finally, Bukowski slammed his locker shut and walked away. A few of the players followed him. Lincoln dressed while James sat with him. "Don't worry, Link," James finally said. "If Bukowski gives you trouble, I'll stand with you. I've known him since first grade. He's a jerk." Lincoln and James left the locker room together. They passed Coach Acetis. He was standing with Mr. Kimball, who was jingling coins in his pocket. The principal patted Lincoln and James on the shoulder and said, "Get 'em." James beamed and Lincoln forced a smile. The gym was noisy. Spectators, mostly kids from Columbus, were stomping their feet in the bleachers. A drummer joined the tuba player. The sound echoed off the walls. The cheerleaders were jumping about, and a man in a Christopher Columbus hat was selling popcorn and soda. Lincoln joined the others in layups, moving swiftly from the top of the key. His blood warmed, and he swiped the ball and practiced jump shots. His knee pained him a little, but it wasn't bad. Laughing to himself, he thought that Mr. Bubble had done wonders for the ligaments in his knee. Lincoln searched the Columbus side of the bleachers for his mother and Roy. He searched for Monica. They weren't there, so he turned to the Franklin side. He could see Coach Ramos with players huddled around him. He made out faces of the players he knew: Louis Estrada, Eddie Bigfoot Negrete, Warren Higgins, Danny Salinas, and Tony. Tony was a second stringer, not a starter, but he played a good game. He was strong and knew how to use an elbow to bruise a rib with one whack. Coach Acetis called his team together. Lincoln, trying his best to get involved, jogged over with his teammates and clasped hands with the players on either side of him, Bukowski and Durkins. Their hands were wet with sweat. "Play man to man," Coach said. "Press. We beat him last time. Let's get him again. Watch Bigfoot. He hurt us last time." Coach looked up at the clock when the buzzer sounded. One of the rest blew his whistle and yelled, "3 minutes," to both coaches. Coach Acetis nodded. He turned to his players, who closed an arm in arm now, as they chanted, "1, 2, 3, break." They broke at the 5 starters stripped off their sweats and gathered at center court, where they shook hands with the starters from Franklin. The pep band stopped playing for the tip-off. The spectators grew quiet, and Coach Acetis ran a towel over his face. The first ref tossed up the ball, and the game started with Franklin in possession. They moved left, then passed, and Estrada shot from 10 feet. Swish. Columbus moved up the court but lost the ball on a turnover. Franklin scored again. Lincoln didn't care to watch the game. He scanned the bleachers on the Franklin side and spotted Vicky. She looked good, as usual, and Lincoln's heart leapt like a fish under his Columbus sweats. But it sank when he saw the dude sitting next to her, close. He wondered if the dude was her new boyfriend. He looked up and saw that the score was 13-7, Franklin. He returned his gaze to Vicky and knew for sure that the dude was her new boyfriend. He was holding her hand, feeding his face with popcorn with his free hand. Lincoln groaned and stared at the floor. When he looked up again, he saw that it was 19-11, Franklin. He saw Danny Salinas push Bukowski, a subtle foul that wasn't called by either ref, and he saw Bukowski shove back, sending Salinas to the ground, a foul that was called, and Bukowski raised his hand, his second personal. "He's so dumb," Lincoln muttered to himself. "He can't handle pressure, the menso." Lincoln heard his name being called from the bleachers. He turned around and saw his mother. "Mijo, when are you going to play?" Roy was with her, his necktie loosened and his hand in a bag of popcorn. "I told you I'm not. I've been benched," he said. Coach Acetis looked over at Lincoln, then at his mother. He didn't say anything, and his face was worried and wet with sweat. His team was getting clobbered. Lincoln scanned the bleachers. "Where's Monica?" he wondered. Pretending to stretch, he stood up for a better look. He spotted her near the entrance in one of the last rows of the bleachers and waved, a bright, toothy grin cutting across his face. She waved back. She was with her father, or someone who looked like he might be her father. The guy looked grim and serious, a Mexican version of Mr. Shulman. All business. Franklin was up 23-16 at halftime. As the Columbus players jogged into the locker room, the pep band let loose with the tuba and trombone, and the popcorn and soda man bellowed, "Get it hot, get it cold." Coach Acetis yelled at his players, stinking the air with his cuss words. Lincoln figured this was their game, not his. Since he wasn't going to play, he left the locker room and jogged quickly over to the Franklin bench. He shook hands with Mr. Ramos, who was happy to see him. Tony muttered, Hey, Link. Under his breath, it's a start, Lincoln thought. Tony was still hurt, but he would get over it. Lincoln returned to his seat. Coach Acetis glared at him. Don't talk to them. They're the other team. Lincoln ignored him. He sat on the bench and gripped a gym towel. He was feeling good. He was glad that Franklin was up, glad that Monica was in the bleachers, glad that his mother and Roy were there. He was even glad for Vicky. Why shouldn't she have a new boyfriend? After all, wasn't he trying to hit on Monica? The second half started with Franklin scoring, Tony sinking one from the top of the key. Lincoln clapped for him without thinking, and Coach Acetis stared angrily in his direction. Lincoln looked at the floor, holding back a smile, feeling giddy because he was now understanding that he was a Franklin boy beneath a Columbus uniform. He was brown, not white, poor, not rich, city, not suburbia. He couldn't help where he lived now. As he sat on the sidelines, he realized he couldn't deny who he was. He watched the game, kneading his hurt knee, and in the last quarter when Coach Acetis said, "Mendoza, you're going in," Lincoln shrugged his shoulders and said, "Why not?" He would break a sweat, make a few baskets, tease Bigfoot, talk Tony back into friendship, shower, and after the game, chug a Slurpee with James. He wasn't going to try to beat Franklin, but he wasn't going to let Columbus look like losers either. Lincoln was going to play for himself, not school pride. Lincoln got the ball and dribbled slowly up the court past to James, who feigned left but cut right and passed back. Lincoln laid it in and raised a clenched fist when fans on the Columbus side of the bleachers stomped their feet. Lincoln's mom and Roy stood up cheering. A Franklin sub for Danny Salinas moved up the court, dribbling poorly. Lincoln slapped the ball from him and dribbled in for an easy layup. Lincoln was getting into the groove of the game, hurt knee or not. He played tight against Luis Estrada, who was tired because he'd played most of the game, and blocked Estrada's shot 15 feet out from the corner. Lincoln passed to James, who passed to Durkins, who took a shot and missed from the top of the key, but Lincoln pulled the ball down, chambered, and shot. Swish! Lincoln broke down the court, Tony running at his side. Lincoln asked, "You mad?" Tony didn't answer him, but Lincoln thought he didn't look mad. Franklin scored and was ahead 47-39 with 3 minutes left. Lincoln realized Columbus couldn't catch up, but he didn't care. He wanted the game to end. Coach Acetis was getting out of hand, insulting his players and yelling at the refs for not calling fouls. He threw down his clipboard, and the spectators on the Franklin side booed him. Mr. Kimball tried to calm him down, and the tuba player covered Coach Acetis' ranting by blowing hard enough to pop an eardrum. Lincoln turned on the juice and scored 3 quick buckets. The Columbus side went wild, spilling popcorn and stomping paper cups. Lincoln pulled down a rebound and pushed up the court, sweat running from his face as he maneuvered between players and came to the boards untouched. The game ended 52-46, with Lincoln heaving the ball from center court and missing the backboard altogether. Lincoln had narrowed the gap, but it was still a league loss. Exhausted, pinching his side, he turned to shake hands with the Franklin players, Luis Estrada and Eddie Bigfoot, and Coach Ramos, who patted Lincoln on his back and said, "You scared us." Lincoln smiled and jogged over to Tony, who was walking away. "I'm sorry, I was wrong." Later, Tony said, toweling his face, "You played a good game, as usual." Smiling, Lincoln returned to the bench and stepped into his sweats. He shook hands with James and even Bukowski, who said, "Good playing." Mr. Kimball asked Coach Acetis why he hadn't put Lincoln in earlier. "I'm the coach," Acetis yelled. "He's got a bad attitude." Lincoln ignored him. He was too happy to bother with accusations. "Coach, for now," the principal remarked as he walked away. Coach Acetis glared at Lincoln, who was waving at his mom and Roy. He snapped, "Mendoza, I want to talk to you." Stepping over the bench and between the players, he grabbed Lincoln roughly by the arm. Lincoln pushed him away, and when Coach tried to grab him again, Roy stepped down and hollered, "Acetis, Frankie Beneda is still looking for you." Coach Acetis turned to Roy. "Do I know you?" "Franklin, 1970. You were second string. Don't you remember?" Roy smiled as he stepped between the coach and Lincoln. "Don't mess with the boy." "Orale," Lincoln said under his breath. He would have liked to see Roy and Coach have it out in front of the entire school. But Coach walked away. Roy returned to Lincoln's mom. They told Lincoln to hurry up and shower so that they could take him out to eat. Lincoln waved to Monica, who waved back. Then he hobbled into the locker room, where he showered and pampered his knee by lathering it with shampoo borrowed from Snake James.